For those of you who don't know me, my name is Julie Bates, and I'm the Donor Relations Manager for the International Elephant Foundation. And thank you for joining us for our conservation chat today. Also on the line, we have Deborah Olson, who's our Executive Director, and Sarah Conley, who is our Conservation Coordinator. And before I turn it over to Sarah, who will be our facilitator today, I just want to go over a couple housekeeping items. As we go through the presentation today, if you have questions for our presenter, we ask that you put the questions in the chat. And then if we get to the end and have time, we may ask people to unmute and ask the questions directly. We'll just see how things are going throughout the hour here. And then I guess other than that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and she will give you a little information about our presenter today. So take it away, Sarah.
Good morning, everyone. We are so happy to have you all here, and we are very happy to have today's guest. We are featuring Dr. Kathleen Gobush, who has more than 25 years of experience in designing and conducting original wildlife conservation research on 3 continents, with numerous peer-reviewed publications on terrestrial and marine mammals. She has held professional leadership roles as a research ecologist, senior program officer, manager, and program director. Currently, she is an independent consultant and is an affiliate assistant professor of biology at the University of Washington. A primary focus of her work has been 2 species of African elephants, involving time in the field and laboratory, investigating their population ecology, behavior, genetics, and physiology. Also, she has worked on ivory-related policy at the national and international levels since 2013 to advance protections and sound management of the 2 elephant species in Africa. In 2015, she co-designed and co-launched cutting-edge anti-poaching software for protected area managers that today is operational in nearly 500 sites worldwide. Kathleen has served as a member of the IUCN African Elephant Specialist Group and as the Red List Authority Coordinator since 2017. More recently, she became the CITES Focal Point for the Specialist Group, as well as a member of its Taxonomic Task Force. So we have quite an expert here to share with us all of her knowledge and take your questions. So please welcome her. We're very happy to have her as a featured guest.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for the kind introduction. I think I'm going to share my screen now.
Please do.
Okay, I think you can see that.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Today I'm going to talk about efforts to ensure data-driven conservation of Africa's elephants. So thanks everyone for attending this talk. I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground, and I'll be ready for your questions at the end. So as Sarah explained, I've worked with African elephants for the last couple of decades. I actually started my career at the Indianapolis Zoo working with captive elephants as a high school student. I went on to get my undergrad degree, and then a PhD focused on elephants in a poached population in Tanzania. And then I went into the working world, got to work with a lot of great employers, including Save the Elephants and Vulcan Philanthropy. And it was at Vulcan in 2017 that I was nominated to be a member of the IUCN African Elephant Specialist Group, and also became an affiliate professor at my alma mater at University of Washington. So it's under those 2 entities, and also through my environmental consultancy business, that I will be describing work from those 3 entities that I've done in the last couple of years. So let's see. Okay, so I'd like to introduce the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, for those of you who might not be familiar. So this is one of those 3 entities I work under. And it's considered the global authority on the status of the natural world and the measures needed to safeguard it. It's one of the oldest and largest conservation organizations on the planet. It was established last century, mid-century, has over 1,000 member organizations, and this includes NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and government agencies. There's actually 200 government agencies that are members from 160 countries. And so overall, there's more than 17,000 experts from these organizations that are members of the IUCN. And the IUCN is structured under 6 commissions. And one of the commissions is the Species Survival Commission. And under this, there are species specialist groups. And these specialist groups are considered the authoritative source for information on whatever species they focus on. So that's what the African Elephant Specialist Group is. And so one thing I want to mention before leaving this slide is the IUCN has a World Conservation Congress every 4 years. And it brings together member organizations to make decisions, resolutions, and recommendations about how we improve, how we manage the natural environment. So this will most likely have resolutions and decisions relevant to elephants or other endangered mammals. So keep your eye out for that. The next WCC is in 2025 in Abu Dhabi. So the African Elephant Specialist Group, which is under the SSC, has the mission to promote the long-term conservation of Africa's elephants throughout their range. We currently have 97 experts in our group. We have 2 co-chairs and a secretariat based in Nairobi, Kenya. And so the members, most of them volunteers, all come together to achieve these main objectives, which relate to one of the main functions of the IUCN to be a provider of up-to-date information, assessment, and analysis on the species in the Species Survival Commission. And so the objectives for the AFESG are to compile and synthesize information about African elephants, both species, to provide technical advice to a number of stakeholders you can see listed here, to build capacity among those stakeholders, and to promote and catalyze conservation action and activities. And so we have a number of working groups and task force that accomplish this. And I'm a member of a few of those that Sarah mentioned. And we have a new website coming out. We don't have that quite ready today, but I can always provide that to Sarah if folks want to see our new shiny new website that should be out later this month. So the specialist group, among the different activities it does, it provides a number of information products. And this is to guide conservation strategy, conservation action, and conservation decisions. And so you can think of the information products that we provide as a pipeline. So that's what you see here. And it starts with information about elephants on the ground in Africa. And so often the first thing that's studied is how many elephants there are, how they're doing, and where they move, and which species they are. And so this information comes from sites across Africa, as typically from population surveys at different sites. There's more than 500 sites in Africa that have elephants today. And so these come in as population estimates, and also primarily genetic taxonomic information about which species the site has. And this information, the population estimates in particular, are held or compiled in a database called the African Elephant Database. And this is managed by the African Elephant Specialist Group. So this is one of their big jobs, is to manage this database. And from this, periodically, the specialist group will produce status reports. So this is that next item on the pipeline. And this, the objective of the status reports are to provide the most authoritative, comprehensive, and up-to-date information on the numbers and distribution of the 2 species of African elephants at national, regional, and continental levels. So then these come out periodically, and a new status report will be coming out soon. I'll talk about that later in this talk. And then if we move along the pipeline, information from the database and the status reports is incorporated in conservation assessments. And one of the main assessments is the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species Assessment. And this looks at extinction risks that each species faces. And I'll go more into that as we proceed in this talk. And then a sister assessment to the Red List, this is a new procedure, it's called the Green Status Assessment, and this looks at species recovery. So all of these items on this pipeline, these information products, provide foundational information and knowledge to, as I said, inform conservation strategy, action, and decisions. And this can occur at local and national levels, also international levels. It's also important for foundations and funders and governments who want to see a future for these 2 elephants. And of course, this foundational information is also important for researchers because it kind of lays the foundation or provides the background as they delve in deeper into specific populations or questions or hypotheses. So that first element in the pipeline relates to population estimates and taxonomic information. So it's this taxonomic information I'm going to go into a little bit right now because I've worked on this in recent years. So in a couple of years ago, in 2021, the specialist group officially recognized the 2 species of African elephants, the African forest elephant, or Loxodon cyclotis, and African savanna elephant, Loxodon africana. And even though this recognition officially of 2 species occurred a couple of years ago, it was built on about a century of information, a century of science that distinguished the 2 animals as distinct. So this was morphological, ecological, demographic, behavioral, distribution information that varied between the 2 animals, but also importantly, the genetic information. And with the genetic advances in the last couple decades, across all sectors, but also in conservation, it was this information that really got us to the point to recognize the 2 species as distinct. And so this is a map, a range map this is produced by the University of Washington. They had a postdoc, Samrat Mandal, who published this paper in 2015 that looked at the differing range of the 2 species and genetically how to distinguish them. And so they used a number of software programs to accomplish this. And it was based on microsatellite DNA analysis of dung samples from elephants from different sites around the continent. And so when you look at this map from 2015, you can see the darker green areas are where the elephants there were unequivocally forest elephants in terms of their genetics. The gold areas where they were unequivocally savanna elephants at these sites. And the very few blue sites you see, some hybrid individuals were detected. So this is where an elephant's parents or grandparents included both species. It turns out in all these cases, it was that grandparent 2 generations back where 2 species were represented. So that's called an F2 hybrid. And so what you can see from this map is there's just a few sites where hybrids were detected. At each of these sites where hybrids were detected, a primary species was. So it was mostly forest elephants and a few hybrids, or mostly savanna elephants and a few hybrid individuals. So what was cool about this paper was that, it showed us this distribution of the 2 species, but it also raised the question of, oh, hey, if we sample more, will we find more hybrids? Or do we need to go into certain sites and confirm what we think we know as forest elephants, based on where they're found in the forest versus savanna elephants, or where the 2 habitats kind of connect. So this work in 2015 kind of launched us into a deeper dive into identifying species, identifying elephants as either species across some of the more remote areas on the map. And so this is collaborative work by the University of Washington. This was the Wasser Lab, and then now they've become the Center for Environmental Forensic Science, and I'm a research affiliate there, so that's CEFS. And then also with the IUCN African Elephant Specialist Group. And so this work is currently being done, and it's in part supported by the International Elephant Foundation. And this is a map of West and Central Africa of what we believe to be forest elephant range. This is actually from 2021. This is getting updated as we speak. But we set out to clarify or confirm where forest elephants we think they are, and genetically they are forest elephants, or any places where we can find hybrids. So here's updated information from that study, and we are drafting a publication on this now. But what you can see here is that blue forest elephant range it's still in blue, and then in the bright green is where we've sampled over time. Most of this has been done through the Wasser Lab, but some more sampling has occurred in the recent last couple of years. And then the yellow is savanna range, which kind of hugs that of the forest elephant. And then where we can see kind of highlighted in bright green where we've sampled but kind of colored in solid is where we found hybrids. So this remained to be a rare phenomenon, even as we've sampled more. So to date, we've sampled over 2,400 samples, and at a more conservative hybrid probability threshold, won't go into the details, but we've had 134 hybrid individuals detected. So that's about 5.5% of all samples that we've collected have come back as hybrid individuals. So this remains a rare phenomenon. And so this information is really important for the next item on the pipeline, which is those status reports, because for the first time, that African Elephant Specialist Group is producing its status reports, one for each species. And before they were combined as all elephants. But now, since the recognition of officially of two separate species, these are being produced, one for each species. And so obviously this taxonomic information is needed, so we make sure each population or each site is in the right report. And so this work is coming out in this month or next for the forest elephant for status report 2024. So it should come out later this June or July. And this is being conducted by the specialist group, and specifically the data review working group. And here's a list of the main authors on this slide. So keep your eye out for that. And it'll be listed on our new website. And then also Sarah can, if you have requests for information on this, I can always email it to Sarah. So this report, I'm not going to give away its headlining results. I'll leave that to the main authors. I don't want to take away their punchline, but they'll be describing or reporting on the total number of forest elephants across all forest elephant range. And these results are based on population estimates and some informed guesses for some more remote areas that haven't had surveys. And this is through data through mid-2022. And the majority of this data in this report is from survey-based estimates. And this is a big improvement from the past. More areas have been surveyed in forest elephant range in recent years. So this has been great. And one of the reasons is because researchers have looked to try new methods to survey forest elephants. It's not easy because these animals are mostly found in closed canopy forests. So you can't use, for example, aerial methods where you fly over and count wildlife. You just can't see through the forest. But one of the new methods or approaches that have been applied to estimating forest elephant population numbers is spatially explicit capture recapture. And so this report is going to describe some of that, but I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail because this is work I was a part of that we published in 2021. And this was part of the Great Elephant Census Forest Initiative that was a collaborative effort between WCS, government agencies in Gabon, and Vulcan Philanthropy, where I used to work. And then I was on contract with WCS later. But these two papers we produced, the first one looked at, hey, is there another way we can survey forest elephant populations using more advanced methods? And so the first paper looked at the conventional way of doing line transect methods with the spatially explicit capture recapture approach. And then we did this at 3 pilot sites. And then we discovered that the genetic method of spatial explicit capture recapture was a really good, robust method to use. And we applied this across Gabon to get a nationwide abundance estimate. So that's what the second paper goes into. And this is one of the main figures from the paper. It's a density, predicted abundance and density across the country. And this country is really important to forest elephants because it holds the majority of Africa's forest elephants are in Gabon. And so they have a lot of suitable habitat, over 200,000 square kilometers of suitable habitat. So that's what this map shows. And the darker red are areas of higher elephant density, and the lighter blue, yellow to blue, are lower density. And to do this work, we tried a new approach. Like I said, it uses the spatial capture recapture modeling approach. And to do this, because we had a lot of range to cover, we designed a systematic sampling design where we went to almost 20 sites across the country. That's what you see here, and got applied our DNA dung collection methods to each site, and then got average density for each site and incorporated influential factors to model or estimate the nationwide national abundance. So I won't go into those details. It gets a little dense, but that just gives you a quick overview. I'm happy to answer questions about this work. So then here's that pipeline again. So I've moved you along the way from those population estimates like we did in Gabon, the taxonomic work, then feed into the status report, the new one coming out for the forest elephant coming this June or July. And then if we move along this pipeline, the last 2 elements are the population assessments. And I work on both of these. And the first one is the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. And it examines, excuse me, risk of extinction that a species faces, is considered to be a global database on how species are faring worldwide. And over 130,000 species have been assessed to date. And through the procedure, they're categorized as one of 8 categories. And that's what you see in this figure here. Pretty much from least concerned in green to extinct in the wild. And so my last talk for IEF, which was a couple of years ago, I went into these results in depth. And these were published in 2021. That's the last time we did the red list assessment on the 2 African elephants. Not going to go into this in any great detail, but I'll just tell you the headlining results that we discovered through a Bayesian hierarchical density modeling approach, that both species are decreasing. That's their population trend. So the savanna elephant, Loxodon africana, was estimated to have a population decline of 60% in the last couple of generations. So that placed them in the endangered category. That's that, oops, that orange category on this figure. And then the Loxodon cyclotis, the forest elephant, was had a steeper rate of decline, and it was considered critically endangered. So one reason I mention this is if you think of that pipeline, we're now moving on to reassess both species. So we've started that effort. I'm leading a team to reassess the forest elephant now that we're going to have new data from the status report that will be out this month. So that's underway, and we'll have results from the reassessment probably sometime next year. And then thereafter, there'll be also a new report for the savanna elephant, and then the team I lead will do a red list assessment for the savanna elephant. So you can kind of get this pipeline, the feel of this pipeline. And so the last item that I have on the pipeline is the green status of species. And this is a new procedure developed by the IUCN. It first came out in 2018, and then they published this paper in 2021 that really refined it. And this method looks at population, global species population, so for the entire species, how depleted or recovered it is across its range. So this complements what the red list says. So the green status develops a green score that it can be one of these 6 categories that you see in this graph at the bottom, that goes pretty much from critically depleted to fully recovered. So we're doing this, I'm doing this with a separate team on the forest elephant for the specialist group, and we'll see where the forest elephant falls out in terms of being depleted across its range, or moderately depleted, or fully recovered. So stay tuned for that. That should be out next year as well. So like I explained, all these information products across the pipeline are important for conservation strategy, action, and decision-making. And one of the main decision-making bodies is CITES, the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. And this is an international treaty or agreement between governments that was set up last century. I do a lot of work with CITES for the specialist group. And CITES aims to ensure international trade of wild flora and fauna does not threaten their survival. And 184 countries are currently signatories to this treaty, or they're considered parties. And the IUCN Specialist Group has a direct role as mandated in one of the resolutions of CITES, and that's to submit any new and relevant information on the conservation status of elephants. So that's what this pipeline, that's just an example of how this pipeline of information directly informs conservation decision-making. And I think I've kind of gone long on this talk, so I'll end here, but I can answer any questions. I want to say thank you for listening to this talk, and a special thanks to all my wonderful colleagues and co-authors on these different teams and projects that are listed here. So a big thanks to all of them. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, if you can, and then I can answer questions. Let's see.
Thank you so much. That was really informative, and I think people learned a lot. We already have questions coming in. First, we have someone asking, you talked about hybrids. Are the hybrids fertile? Because, you know, we have some animal people here. They know that sometimes you have hybrids that can't reproduce. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're certain they're fertile because most of them are coming through the genetic methods. We're in EB hybrids, that software is pinpointing that these are F2 hybrids. So the original union between, let's say, a forest elephant female and let's say a savanna elephant male happened in the grandparent generation. Then they had offspring, and then what we're seeing today is the grandchildren. So that kind of demonstrates that they are fertile. No one's really looked in depth at, you know, if there's any advantage or higher fertility or lower fertility, but we know, just broadly speaking, they are fertile.
Very interesting. Someone's also asking about, you mentioned capture and recapture. Can you talk about that process and how it's used? So maybe first explain what that process is for those who don't know, and then talk about how it's used in the censusing.
Okay, so it's non-invasive sampling. It's a spatial explicit capture is a modeling approach to estimate population abundance. And I think for smaller animals, they actually used to capture and tag them and then recapture them. With elephants, we don't do that. It's we do non-invasive approaches where we collect their dung. So we send field teams into a specific sampling site, and they traverse the landscape looking for dung samples and collect a bit of that. And then the dung is shipped to a laboratory where the genetic analysis is done to ID the individual um, as distinct. So it's this individual ID. And so when we collect dung samples repeatedly over space and time, we can see which individuals do we catch multiple times. And that's a recapture rate. And we use that in the modeling approach. It's a Bayesian modeling approach to then estimate how many elephants are in that site.
Excellent. Okay. Perfect. Follow-up question on the hybrids. So if they are fertile, are the two species totally speciated?
Uh, yeah, so I'm not a taxonomic expert per se, but you can have fertile offspring and still be considered two species. These two elephants are estimated to have separated 2 to 5 million years ago. They have a lot of differences. There's been a lot of examples in the last couple of decades where they found two different species that have produced fertile offspring. I think one example is Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. So we all have some, I know I have some Neanderthal genetics when I do my 23andMe, not a lot, a little bit. So that's just an example where you can have different species that come together, but we are considered different species. Hopefully that helps. And if anybody knows more about Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, please jump in. But that's just a good example, I think.
Interesting. Okay. And have you found any F3 or F4 hybrids beyond the F2s? Or can you tell? Is that something you can?
We can't really detect with the EB hybrids software. It assigns this uses a Bayesian approach, also a probability of hybrid assignment. And anything F2 or earlier is lumped as F2. So it doesn't kind of have that resolution.
Sure, fair enough. Um, so you've talked about using dung samples. Maybe you can walk us through the process of collecting those samples, what a typical day in the field is like when you're grabbing that.
Sure. I actually did this for my PhD. I collected dung samples. I was asking other questions, and that related to hormones, genetics, and behavior. And that was in Tanzania. Didn't go over that today, but the method is the same. So I can say this from firsthand knowledge. Um, basically, you can go into the field and collect from elephants while you're watching them, or you can do it like, for example, with the spatially explicit capture recapture. You just go in and just look for dung essentially on the ground and collect it. What I did for my PhD is woke up early, drove out to where elephants were in the savannah, and watched them, recorded their behavior, and then watched who left a sample, who defecated. And then once the elephants left the area and it was safe, I left my vehicle, went out and sampled the dung samples, put it in vials of media solution, and took them back to the lab. Once in the lab, you extract the DNA. There's an basic kind of extraction procedure to extract the DNA. It's a QIAGEN stool kit. They even use those for human medical purposes. You extract the DNA, and then you amplify it with PCR techniques to amplify the microsatellite DNA that you're interested in. And you amplify those and then look at those. You score them based on their alleles to get a genetic profile or a genotype, and each individual has a unique genetic profile. And so you compare those profiles to say, hey, have we sampled the same individual twice, for example, for the explicit capture recapture, Or for my PhD work, I looked at, hey, how are these individuals related? How close are their genetic signatures, essentially? So that's a pretty basic description, but hopefully that gives you a flavor of how that happens.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's great. Um, Someone's asking, what is the most difficult or challenging part of your work?
I really enjoy my work, so I don't know what's difficult. I think I've recently become an independent consultant, so that's been a joy because I can work across a lot of different projects, and that's why I can kind of describe where I've jumped in different places on the science, conservation, the policy. So there's a lot to be grateful for. I mean, the most difficult part is, with elephants, the primary threats are habitat loss and degradation and poaching for the illegal ivory trade. So the most difficult part is that's a sad situation where they're suffering from these threats, and a lot of these populations, most of them are in decline. Um, it's only going to get better if we pay attention and support these elephants and conduct more science and help inform better, make better decisions about their conservation and protections. So it's all worth it. But I guess that sad fact that they're declining is the toughest part.
Absolutely. And that actually segues into another question we had. How can the red list and green list information be used by governments and conservationists to help elephants? How do we apply all this great data to real boots on the ground conservation work?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so it's red list and the green status. So it informs strategy, action, and decision making. So it's not always boots on the ground. There's also, you know, uh, people in decision making. I was kind of thinking something. What's the equivalent of boots on the ground when you're in a policy forum? Um, so anyway, so it really works in all three places. So when you have a better understanding of how the species is doing across its range, you can get a sense of urgency and prioritization that engenders political will that's important for decision making. It's important for strategy at the national level. If these countries are going to these international meetings and it's getting prioritized, and they go back home and develop their nationwide strategies um, on where they're going to concentrate their efforts and how much attention and resources they're going to put into elephants versus other needs the country's going to have. And so this kind of continent-wide view helps inform the international decision making, and then the national, and then that trickles down to the local level. So that's one way. Those two assessments that are species-wide are important. I think also, looking at, because those assessments are based on the site level data that we synthesize up to the species level. It also pinpoints these bright spots and these, like, I guess, dark spots, places that need more attention, places that are good examples that are doing really well. So kind of when we have the synthesis across the species range, we're able to discern that. And then we can say, ooh, this area is not doing as well, relatively speaking. And this bright spot could be an example. Can we put these two groups together and get them collaborating, or this group to give advice to this group, so you can think of it in a bunch of different ways on how those assessments at the global, species level can inform up and down.
Absolutely. More information and building more connections can only benefit. Um, More questions. Someone's interested about your time at the Indy Zoo. What did you do, and how did your experience there influence your path?
Sure. So that was a while ago. But I was in high school, and I went to Lawrence Central High School in Indianapolis. And we had a senior science seminar, and I was lucky to get picked for that. And I met a researcher from Butler University in Indianapolis who was doing a study on female vocalizations or communicate female elephant vocalizations and behavior. And so I went out to the zoo, I think a couple times a week when I was in high school, and got to record elephant vocalizations. A lot of them are in a range, audible range that we can't pick up. So we would play the recordings at a faster speed so we could hear them. And so I did that for my senior year of high school. And I had wanted to work on elephants since I was 7 years old. So that was a dream come true then. And then it's just kind of carried on. Just for context, this is kind of aging me, but that was all happening around the time that the international ban on ivory went into effect. And that was put in effect by CITES, that organization I mentioned. So that went in effect in 89, and I did that high school work shortly thereafter. So it definitely felt at the time that, we were really in dire straits with elephants. And so it was really rewarding to be able to do something to learn about them back then. So I was actually in the Indianapolis Star, if you really want to see a funny picture of me from back then.
Awesome. That's great. Um, we have some people asking, do you have any knowledge? I mean, I know you're IUCN, African Elephant Specialist Group, but do you know if similar work is being done with Asian elephants, maybe with the Asian Elephant Specialist Group?
Yeah, they do a lot of great work. I'm not as attuned to their work. I've met a lot of the members from that specialist group, and they're all fun to hang out with, all great people. Um, they are doing a lot of, science, and they have that same mandate to provide information to CITES. They go about it a different way, just because they have a different context and situation. I'm not sure if they have like an African, we have the African elephant database. I haven't heard that they have a database per se, and I'm not quite certain if they do status reports. I know they do conservation status updates, at least to CITES. And I'm not sure if they have a website like our new one coming out. So that's all good questions. I should know more. I should commit to trying to learn more about that. But I think at least on the IUCN.org website, you should be able to go to a description of that status group with some links.
Follow up to your discussion about working at Indy Zoo and the professors you worked with. Someone wants to know if you know Professor Melissa Cheyenne.
Yeah, that's who I worked with back
Perfect.
then.
That's great. Um, and maybe you want to comment on this. There was just an article in the news yesterday that someone's asking about, talking about, do elephants have names for each other, personalized
Oh.
calls? Are you familiar with that work?
No, I didn't read the article, but personalized calls. I know they're doing some AI technology with whales. That was on, I saw something on that on PBS News Hour or something. So I didn't know that maybe they're applying, does it involve AI, or are they applying it to elephants?
From what I read, they are applying AI to sort of recorded
Yeah,
elephant calls. So we'll see how robust that research is.
that would be fascinating. That'd be awesome to see if it comes out with anything.
Yeah. Uh, so maybe you can talk a little bit about how the conservation challenges between the two species of African elephants differ. So do you have a different approach when it comes to savanna versus forest?
Well, I mean, it's the two main threats, the illegal ivory trade and habitat loss and degradation. If you just talk about the habitat, you know, they're different, primarily different ecosystems where you've got savanna elephants in savanna. They're also even in desert, other grassland, some woodland. Whereas forest elephants are primarily in closed canopy forests, but they'll also kind of venture into forest savanna mosaics. Um, but anyway, right there you have kind of different habitat issues going on. For example, in a lot of forested countries, you obviously have logging, for timber trade, and you have palm oil plantations, so kind of conversion of land a suitable habitat to agriculture. So that's a big issue. And then you've got elephants squeezed into small forest fragments that remain. And then you have kind of crop breeding where you've got these agricultural plantations right on the edge. And so there's going to be a focus in that direction there. Whereas habitat issues on the savanna side are different. They've just got different practices going on. You do have that crop breeding, but that also even has different tools that work there, for example, than in with forest elephants. So that's just one example. On illegal wildlife trade, actually am on contract with CITES right now to look at national ivory action plans. And these are a process through CITES that certain countries that are affected by the illegal ivory trade um, participate in to try to improve the situation. And so the way the illegal trade happens in forested countries and with forest elephants, it just has the patterns are a little bit different than in savanna situations. That may have to do more with the criminal enterprises that are effective in each country. And it just so happens that there's different kind of patterns there that then tend to follow forest or savanna elephants. It's kind of a complicated answer on that one, but there are some differences with the illegal ivory trade also. So, that kind of speaks to the two conservation challenges. Also, how you monitor the populations to know where they're getting poached is going to differ. You can do it from aerial survey in savanna populations more readily. Harder to find carcasses in the forest. Moist tropical forest, the carcasses also decompose faster. So there's these kind of, minute differences to really big differences that just kind of roll out as you're trying to mitigate the threats on the ground. I think that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And it sort of dovetails with another question that they had. Are there specific challenges that you faced in studying those forest elephants, which I think you kind of touched on, uh, versus if you studied the savannas? I think you sort of.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I used to work with savanna elephants primarily, and more recently forest elephants. I also worked with marine mammals in my career. And the difference, I remember the first time going to, tropical moist closed canopy forests looking for forest elephants. The difference between to me, working with savanna elephants on more open landscape, the difference between forest and savanna when you're actually trying to get things done is just as different as it is from working on land to working on the water, because you're just using different tools and different methods to see and detect things that are just very different. And then your ability to detect the animals is just so different. Um, so I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think habitat and circumstances make a huge difference, so that makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. Um, we've got some more questions about hybrids. So, can you tell a hybrid from looking at them? Are there unique characteristics of them? And is this, since there are two recognized species, is hybridization problematic as far as a conservation point of view?
Well, first, that second part of the question, because they're rare, because remember, we had only 5.5 of all the samples of over 2,000 samples across the continent that were hybrid. So they're not really a conservation problem. They're conceptually, maybe they are, because people got to wrap their head around it. It's a little bit more complicated. Um, but like numerically, they're so rare that in any place that they're found, there is that kind of quote unquote pure species. So any of these sites, and the new status report will go into this. And it's the first time they've had to, because it's the first time they're doing one for each species, but kind of go into the decision tree of how to decide if a site is savanna or forest when you have hybrids. Typically, it's primarily forest with a couple of hybrids, and that's only at, I think, 7 or 8 sites total out of more than 100 sites. And then same with savanna. It's typically savanna elephants with a few hybrids with just a handful of sites out of hundreds that are being examined. But that kind of decision making is laid out, will be laid out in the status report. And then the first part of the question, if like from the naked eye, if you could recognize a hybrid, I think it's pretty hard. There's a study by Julie Bonald, Bonnald. She might have done two, published those in recent years. Really great work where she looked at, she did a genetic study, but then she also did a morphological study, kind of looking at using statistical methods to differentiate based on morphometrics. It wasn't perfect, perfectly clean, just separation. For example, it's not like one has, tusk length of 10 centimeters and lower, and the other, or 10, inches and lower, and the other one is only 15 inches and higher. There isn't, it's more of a gradation. And then the hybrids will be along that continuum. But she's got neat work about the morphology, looking into that a little bit.
Great. We'll have to check that out.
You should have her do a talk.
Maybe we should. Absolutely. Um, so how can people on this chat help? It seems like this is overwhelming and really a lot on the government level, but what's something that someone can do who's just sitting listening at home? What can they do to help elephants and help forest elephants?
Well, that's a great question. Well, you can, well, like in the United States here, I think we may have some international guests at this webinar, but in the United States, you can help influence policy at the, state level with your state representatives and senators to make sure conservation and biodiversity protection efforts are maintained or enhanced or increased from our country. Our country has a big voice in a lot of international meetings like CITES. So if you want to kind of go think of that, that's a pipeline where it's, individual citizens talking to their representatives, talking to the passing laws, or that then influence the agency's agendas when they go to international meetings. Or, the U.S. is a big funder. It has the African Elephant Conservation Act that is a big funder of a lot of work. It's a big funder of the African Elephant Specialist Group, in fact. So, there's a lot of places where you can just maintain this issue as a priority among all the issues going on. We don't want to get fatigued and forget about the elephants. We shouldn't have to have a poaching crisis for them to get attention. And so you got to kind of keep your foot on the gas pedal, maybe, on that with your representatives and your policymakers. You can also support individual organizations, but financially, if you'd like. Some people don't have those means, so you can also volunteer. I don't know any volunteer options off the top of my head, but I think there definitely are out there. And you can also teach younger generations, whether you've got younger people in your family or you volunteer at schools. You can kind of emphasize the importance of the natural world and conserving it, and use elephants as an example. And what would the world be without elephants? Kind of go down those paths and get them thinking and imagining, and introduce them to scientists or different roles that people do today to help elephants. So maybe those kids can imagine that as their career. So I think there's a lot of different things you can do, and it's not all financial. There's other ways, and a lot of it just starts with keeping a focus and attention on the animal and emphasizing that where you can.
Absolutely. And I think that all of that starts with being well informed, which I think
Yeah.
you made a great difference today, teaching everyone about your work. Thank you so much. I am going to pass it on to Julie to do some wrap up there.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you, Kathleen, for this wonderful presentation. I
Thank
just
you.
want to invite everybody to put their cameras on, and let's give Kathleen a wonderful round of applause for this great presentation. It was so wonderful, and I feel like I
Thanks.
learned so much. So thank
Thanks.
you very much. Also, I've put in the chat for our next two conservation chats, just so if you want to save the dates. Our next one is July 10th at 10 a.m. Central. And of course, if you are on my email list, you will probably be getting links and information about that as well. One other thing, we have recorded this, so we will have a link available, and we will send that out to everybody who I have on my distribution list. So if you're getting emails from me right now about chats, you will definitely get that link at some point. So thank you again, and thank you, Kathleen, for this wonderful presentation. And we hope to see you all again next month.